It's nice to meet you after our interactions on Facebook. Cool. So today's session, hi Susan, today's session all about using the Enneagram in corporates. And my rationale for running this session is really to share some of the things that I've found that have worked really well, and to share some of the things that I've come across in my supervision of facilitators in corporate environments and corporate coaches, some of the things they run into, some questions around the sales process, like how do we actually position this thing? What do we tell them about it? How do we make it relevant for the business? So that's really one of my primary concerns and something that bothers me about how the Enneagram is used. So I wanted to look at that. And we can get into some process and application questions, but I want to actually take those up in a subsequent session with the community of practice as well. So I'd say today we can focus a lot on business relevance and almost how to sell and position the Enneagram. So that was my idea, but I don't want to charge ahead with my agenda. I'd love you to put some questions in the chat, and Mario can look at them, I can look at them, and there are a lot of experts in this room who've done a lot of work. And so, we're going to open the floor and have some shared discussion. I just want to extend a very special welcome to Mario. He's like a very famous veteran in this world of corporate Enneagram work. If you don't know his work, Awareness to Action. And Mario, I just want to invite you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Awareness to Action and a bit of your personal background.
Sure. Famous in the sense that if you hang around long enough, more people get to know you, right? So I started working with the Enneagram in 1994. I was introduced to it then, and started using the Enneagram in my work as an executive coach and consultant in 1997. So I've been doing this a long time, and have what I like to say is that when I first started working with the Enneagram, there weren't that many resources on the Enneagram, right? There's a ton of them now. It used to be the issue was trying to find resources. Now the issue is trying to weed out the good resources from the not so good resources. And by the way, on that vein, I want to recommend Carl's book as a good resource for anybody who's interested in using the Enneagram in organizations.
Thank you, Mario. I did not pay for that endorsement, by the way.
You did not, but you will, Carl. Don't worry, you will.
Carl, please put the title in the chat and maybe even a URL to the Amazon link. But carry on, Mario. Sorry.
Sure. So, one of the nice things over time is that I have seen a lot of really interesting applications to the Enneagram, and, people who do it very differently than I do. Ingrid and I have a very different style and approach. And that, what I always say is if the Enneagram teaches us nothing else, is that there are different kinds of people in the world. Right? And different kinds of people have different approaches, and there's no one right approach to anything. There are approaches that work and those that don't, okay, is the way I like to think about it. So, so I have my way of doing things, ways that I have found to work because they fit me and my temperament, my view of the world, and they seem to work for my clients. But it's only one way of doing things, so I always enjoy sharing my perspective on things and how I go about it, again, with the acknowledgement that it's one way to do things, okay, and there are lots of paths to the waterfall. So, like I said, I've been doing this for almost 25 years now. At one point, I was on the board of directors of the International Enneagram Association and ended up being president for a couple of years. I've had the good fortune to work with clients and do workshops all over the world over the past 20 years or so, and always enjoy meeting new people. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you, Ingrid, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much. That's great. So my first question for you, Mario, is what are your criteria for something, to define something as a good resource?
For me, and so are you talking about say books about the Enneagram, videos about the Enneagram, that sort of thing, or approaches to
when you said at first there were no resources and now the challenge is to filter and find the good ones, I was wondering what your kind of selection criteria are.
Great. Yeah, so for me, what I look for are, when I look at different approaches to the Enneagram and different resources related to the Enneagram, having had the benefit of experience, I mean, because this is what I do for a living, right? I use the Enneagram in organizations. And so I have seen things that do not work, okay? I have seen things that, I have tried things that do not work, right? Some of my ideas did not work. Some of the, engagements, interventions I designed were not effective. And so you throw them away and you go to something else. So for me, the first thing I look at when I'm looking at a resource is this grounded in experience or is it grounded in theory?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the Enneagram is a model that invites speculation and hypothetical development, right? So people say, oh wow, the Enneagram's this and this, and so so you can take the Enneagram and apply it to any situation, and here's the way it would work, and they and people are always trying to fit the model onto the environment and make reality fit a model. There's a great quote that I always start off all of my trainings with, that all models are wrong, but some are useful, right? And the Enneagram is no different. It is a model that is really, really useful, but it doesn't apply to everything. So for me, it is, does this person actually have experience in what they're talking about, what they're writing about? There are times when I read an Enneagram book, and the only thing I can compare it to is a book on how to swim by somebody who's never had their hair wet, right? So I want to see real world experience. I want to see practicality. Okay, that's the key thing for me. Working in organizations, I do not get paid to help people speculate and philosophize and go through sophistic exercises. Right? You paid for results, right? So does this help people get results in their life and in their work? And does it do it in a clear and hopefully simple way? I like simplicity, but there's some things are not simple, right? So some things require more information, and you can go deeper and deeper into things with more and more information. But I look for practicality and experience.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. And the key things I'm taking away there is a general emphasis on pragmatism and overall, not just an approach that is client success oriented, but there's an ethical underpinning to that, is what am I here for? Who am I serving? And that it's very reality based. And what I like also is you're saying throwing away things that don't work. So being open to being wrong and getting feedback from real people in real organizations, and not trying to force the Enneagram and insist that it's right. There's the one Gurdjieff quote is that the Enneagram is a model of all and everything. And you're almost saying the opposite. It's absolutely not a model of all and everything. And it's a model that is wrong, but works well enough for you to want to use it consistently over a long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of things on that. I mean, Hemingway said that a good writer has to be willing to kill their babies, right? And what he meant by that is that sometimes a good writer writes a really great sentence, but it doesn't fit with the story, right? So I have to put it aside. And we all have to be willing to, kill an idea that we had that we really, really like, but doesn't work, okay, or is not useful, or could be better. The shoot, there was something else you said there that I wanted to comment on as well. I'm drawing a blank. Maybe it'll come back to me. Sorry.
I said only a few things: the client success mindset, the ethical orientation, reality feedback loop.
Yeah, so the idea of the model too, I'll just comment on, and obviously the ethical thing. So when I work with clients, I'm not selling them the Enneagram, right? I'm selling them some benefit in their life. I'm selling them more effective leadership, better communication, better collaboration, right? And the Enneagram just happens to be really, really useful for those things. But if I find that for whatever reason, the Enneagram is not working in that situation, then I let go of the Enneagram and I focus on something else. Sometimes you get people who might just not be open to the Enneagram at all, right? They go online and they, search on Enneagram and they find all kinds of crazy stuff and they don't want anything to do with it, right? Or they think the idea of, putting people into boxes is problematic and they don't want to be in a box, so I'm not even going to listen to this. All right, fine. I'm not paid to convince you that the Enneagram is right and real and useful. You're paying me to help you get some results, so I'm going to focus on that. And we also have to, and this gets to the idea of models. We have to be really, really careful about force-fitting our assumptions about enneatypes and assuming that we're right, assuming that something we read, for example, applies to all people of that type. And if the person is not relating to that, then they're the problem rather than our assumptions being the problem. One of my favorite one of these is about sevens being happy all the time. Right? Oh, sevens are so positive. They're happy all the time. Oh, and by the way, they never finish anything. And, these other sort of stereotypes. I live with 3 sevens, and I can tell you that they're not happy all the time. Right? In fact, a lot of sevens complain an awful lot because they're seeking excitement. They're seeking stimulation. So they're often very frustrated with what they're experiencing because it's not as good as what they had hoped it would be. Right. So it's common for people to force stereotypical thinking about the Enneagram onto their clients, onto their environment, and trying to explain everything that they're seeing through forcing it into their perception of the Enneagram. So we always have to be willing to question our assumptions about the Enneagram itself and what we've learned about it. I always love anomalies, right? I love something that doesn't make sense, right? Oh, wait a minute, this person's a 5, but I'm seeing this, right? Or this person's a 4, but I've never seen this in a 4 before. So what's going on here, right? And we have to be willing to dig on those anomalies, to pull on those threads of inconsistency, because that's how we refine our understanding of the system and our understanding of other people. And one of the things that I often see people doing with the Enneagram is making it more and more and more complex, okay, as a way to try and explain more phenomena, right? Instead of kind of simplifying it and making sure that our first principles are more accurate, right? Is how I like to think about this.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's great. And like a core theme that I'm taking from what you're saying is the difference between positioning ourselves as experts and wanting to be right, and being curious and being ready to really listen and receive those anomalies and explore them with clients. And I'm wondering if behind that we can look at ourselves and think, why am I clinging to this idea of expertise that I find in this model? It's a kind of life jacket almost that is probably based on insecurity, I would imagine. And when we become more fluent in dealing with the ambiguity and complexity of a business environment and interpersonal dynamics in a team, we are going to be able to let go of the Enneagram a little bit and be with what actually is in front of us, which is a bunch of individuals and all the layers of, you know, conscious and unconscious things going on between them.
Yeah, for sure. When I first started working with the Enneagram, it was really important to me to feel like I could identify somebody's Enneagram type really quickly, right? And, because I'm the expert, right? So I'm supposed to be able to figure out what your Enneagram type is in our first meeting, and then, unveil all the wisdom in the universe to you based on that. But what I had found is that by letting go of this need to quickly and accurately identify somebody's type, I've actually gotten better at assessing people's type, right? I always position any assessment of somebody as a provisional hypothesis. And I use that term very, very specifically. We've only just met, but, here's what I'm seeing so far.
Yeah.
So my provisional hypothesis is this, but if new data comes in, I'm going to change my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll take pride in changing my mind. It is a big difference, right? It's hard. If you have a big ego like I do, it's hard to learn that lesson, right? That, it's actually a sign of wisdom, I guess, to admit you were wrong and change your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing a bunch of kind of metacognitive skills around flexibility, tolerance of ambiguity, willing to question your assumptions, and then that thing of being able to hold something as a provisional hypothesis. And I think this ties into some of the things I've gotten, from Tom Condon. And the one is that he says with that wry sense of humor, turns out we're all individuals, with the epigenetics, the genetics, the social environment, the culture, nationality, socio-demographics. There's so many variables shaping us that, the idea of this innate type, this essentialism, is really not helpful. And it makes people, especially in corporates, I think, feel very boxed in. And that's why, I've come across clients who don't want to use it because of previous exposure where they felt that a language is set in where people say to each other, oh yeah, that's because you're a 2. And that has, it hasn't made people feel good or helped them really. It hasn't been useful. And then the other thing that I like to bring together with what you're saying about provisional hypothesis is that type is a reality strategy rather than something innate. So I err on the side of presenting it in corporate environments as an adaptive strategy that's got multiple benefits, was an absolute necessity in our early childhood context. There are elements of defense and, that adaptation and survival, and that it's deployed rather than something that we're stuck with for eternity and have to try and fix, which is something that I think I'm on a bit of a mission about in my Enneagram work, is to create a bit more spaciousness around the idea of type, and especially in corporate environments where it can be weaponized. So I find that sometimes when somebody's got someone else and they think of them as essentially a type, they kind of nail them on it and use it in some way, whether to extract more value or to sabotage somebody or whatever it is. So I'd just love to hear your perspective on that, the fixity of type and how you deal with that ethically in contexts where power is a real thing and people don't, there isn't such a thing as safety as a given,
Yeah. So you're hitting on all my favorite topics in that one statement there, Ingrid. So I'm going to try and not pontificate too much here all at once. But so number one, your comment on essentialism versus, say, nominalism is something that I'm very passionate about too, right? I mean, there is this mindset around the Enneagram rooted in Neoplatonic essentialism, this idea that a thing is a thing is a thing no matter what, right? It's a fixed form and never changing. That's not an idea that you'll find in most modern approaches to either philosophy or science or biology or anything. But I tend to side with Occam on this, the medieval philosopher, taking a nominalist approach, right? Meaning that a label is something we put on something that shares certain characteristics with other things that are similar to that, but they're all different, right? And so, so for me, somebody that we call, I don't know, say a type 8, which is my Ennea type, they're not doing 8 stuff because they're an 8. We call them an 8 because they do these certain things, right? And there is a difference there. So the term adaptive strategy is something that we, wrote about in Awareness to Action, almost 20 years ago when that book first came out. I was inspired by reading Naranjo's Character and Neurosis, where he talks about the Enneagram types as adaptive strategies, right? Meaning approaches to solving the problems that come our way. Right? And I really liked that because it's, again, it's not about fixity. It's about an approach. And it's a great corporate word, right? I mean, if you talk about strategies to people, they get that, okay? Every business has a strategy, right? So it's just a way of solving a problem. So we look at the Ennea types as people who share a preferred strategy. You've got these 9 strategy options, and one of them is one we rely on more than the other 8. Okay, we call me an Enneagram type 8 because I use the strategy of striving to feel powerful more than I use the other 8 strategies. Okay, doesn't mean I always do that and I only do that. That's ridiculous. We all know that people are complex, but it's the one that we do. So we're all varied. Nobody is fixed in character completely, but it's also silly to ignore tendencies, right? When I was young, and I had a job and had a coworker who at the time seemed really old, but I've come to realize he was probably about the age that I am now at the time. And he said to me, Mario, if you want to be happy in life, you have to realize there are 2 kinds of people. There are morning people and there are night people, right? And you should marry somebody who's the same as you. Now, there are obviously more than 2 kinds of people in the world, but some people are night people and some are morning people, right? I'm a morning person. My wife is a night person, right? She's always frustrated with me because I'm falling asleep, sitting there watching television at 9 o'clock at night. And I'm frustrated with her because I'm up 3 hours in the morning before she is, okay? So yeah, there are tendencies that we have, and ignoring these tendencies is silly. So it's helpful to know that I am an 8 because I overdo that strategy or I rely on that strategy more, but we can't see it as something unchanging. The benefit of this in working with a client in an organization is that it takes the shame out of things, right? When I have to work with a client, and I do a 360 assessment of them, and the feedback comes back and says, they're rude, they're a bully, they're this, they're that. the initial reaction, if they think that I am this thing that doesn't change, is to feel shame and to reject the feedback. But if I say to them, I'm not surprised to see this, it's the pattern that a lot of eights fall into. Okay. But you can change it. You can work with the strategy. You can redefine how you think of the strategy. You can change your behaviors and still be who you are. That's liberating for people because they feel that they have some sense of control over who they are, some ability to influence how they behave. They become eager to grow and change instead of resistant to it. So I find this approach makes it much more useful, much more compassionate in the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's so many things you've said there that are a deepening and expansion on these themes of provisional hypothesis. But that core thing between the Neoplatonism and the kind of, I don't know, Viveki, I sent you that thing the other day, a kind of materialist monism or psychobiology or neuro, whatever you want to use, that isn't an essentialist, more spiritual kind of discourse about these forms. Yeah, absolutely. I think that can be very alienating and esoteric when people use that kind of language. And I know when I first started working with the Enneagram, I thought that it was my role to bring mysticism to the boardroom, and you can imagine how well that went down. And then on the second point, on the question of shame, for me, that's really crucial, and it's at the core of my work on trauma-informed use of the Enneagram, which is that our ego strategies are actually shame-based identifications that are then flipped into pride-based compensations. So this, the power of 8 is a compensation for vulnerability. I mean, I don't go into this kind of psychoanalytic language in corporate coaching context, but it informs my deep appreciation of that strategy as the best and most intelligent piece of genius that the person had at their disposal, pre-verbally already, starting to figure out this is the best way to be around here. And so really being incredibly validating of people's reality strategy and its value and how it's worked for them. And then within that, acknowledging, it works until it doesn't. And you know better than I do what the pitfalls have been and where you've run into problems interpersonally or, in your biases or whatever. So I really love that you mentioned shame. And I think in a work context for me, that's even more important because of what's at stake in those environments. So I try very hard to make sure that people aren't exposed or in any way shamed or humiliated around their strategies, and to kind of, I don't like to say I'm protecting the clients, but to make sure that nobody in the room is weaponized by the dark mirror, the nukes that the Enneagram actually has. That those moments are, Richard Raw calls it necessary humiliation, but you don't really want that in a team. So yeah, and when people talk about psychological safety as if that means self-disclosure, then I wouldn't say negate it, but I say that's not what it's about. This is not about deep self-disclosure in a team setting. It's about working together more effectively, problem solving, appreciating diversity. So I don't know, it sounds as though we resonate on that as well.
Sure. Look, again, there are different sort of circumstances in which we might work with people, right? I mean, if I'm, if I decide to do a a weekend workshop on, and explore deep inner issues, that's one thing, right? But usually what I'm doing is going into people's places of work where, with people that they have to continue to work with and face every day and interact with. And anything I do to create, exposure to a vulnerability in some way, right? I like your word of weaponize, right? I mean, and I see this all the time, even among Enneagram teachers who use the Enneagram as a weapon against their students or people who might disagree with them on a particular topic. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, you just say that because you're an 8, kind of thing. Well, I am an 8, but let's look at the, what I said on its own merits, right? Rather than trying to, ignore what I'm saying because, you want to put it off on me. So, yeah, I mean, there's just an ethical and it's even moral responsibility to work with people in a safe way, right? I mean, that's just, that's just being a decent human being, really. I remember, when I first started doing this, I actually worked with a guy for about a year who would take pride in making his clients cry, right? And, and for him, it was, that's a sign that I'm doing something deep in them, and all this. And what I said to him, no, it's just a sign that you're an asshole, and so, and you have some ego need to feel superior to other people by doing something like this. So, yeah, I mean, safety is paramount.
Yeah. And I think we really need to be clear in articulating what we mean by that, and not to delude our clients that safety means self-disclosure and deep vulnerability and connecting in an interpersonal way that is not really matched to a business context. I once read a book called Leadership BS, and it was actually really good. It's like, appreciate that person across the table wants your job, and to just be aware of power dynamics and the fact that this is a contractual environment, where you are disposable. So I like to be incredibly realistic about that stuff and not have any.
Was that Jeffrey Pfeffer's book?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Right?
He writes a lot about power dynamics and in organizations and stuff. I highly recommend if that's who it is. But
I think it was. But I used to be so naive and idealistic about, creating a little mini utopia in a team. And I think that book was helpful for me in catching a bit of a wake up about, and I mean, later on, I would be able to relate that back to my own Enneagram style, the 794. I know you don't use tri-type, but SX7, is head in the clouds, magical thinking, one workshop, and we all love each other so much. It doesn't work like that. And so, yeah, getting real about what's going on there has been important for me. I just hear a real contextual awareness in everything you say. And the other thing that struck me for practitioners is this awareness around how we hold the power of the Enneagram. So from an ethical perspective in my coaching training, that's the core. But in a team, it's just as relevant. And one of the things that I've learned in my trauma training is that when we want to exercise power over our clients in some way, for example, making them cry or having an agenda to get through the defenses, like people will say, I just can't get through to this 3, or, that is a trauma-based ego strategy around helplessness. So in the same way, that the 8 might be powering up against vulnerability, that desire to have an effect on somebody and have that agenda as a compensation for the coach's own helplessness. And that's where supervision really helps, is, when a coach comes to me with I'm really struggling with this client. The question is about what they're bringing to that they are wrestling with the client's ego and trying to break their defenses, which is an issue.
It's really important that any coach remembers that their job is to help their client become the best version of themselves that client can become, not to become some version of you or who you think that person should be, right? And again, that's a matter of confidence, right? The coach who lacks confidence feels like, okay, I have to get a specific result with this person. And all that does is it tries to fit people into, to boxes or paths that may not be theirs. And it may not be, frankly, what you're being paid to do. Right? So the coaches, the sign that a coach has succeeded is that the client feels like they've been heard, they've been seen for who they are, and they've made some of the progress that they've set out to make. Right. So if you're, how do I get through to this person? You're already admitting that you've set up a combative stance, right? You've set up where you're in some sort of conflict with the person,
Yes.
rather than some sort of supportive role.
Yes.
Right? It's not how do I get through to this person? It's how can I better help this person is the question we should be asking ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah, to not see it as an antagonism against the defensive system of the client.
Yeah.
And to really support them. I see it as a state change. We're supporting the self-reconnection and a state change for them. So it does turn out to be progress, self-efficacy, better decision-making from a more grounded place in the self. Yeah, that's great. And it also brings to mind something else that Tom speaks about, and it's come in my supervision a lot and in his teaching around different psychologists and psychological models, is that we unconsciously or unwittingly teach other people our defensive strategy. We teach them our type. We teach them our defense mechanisms, and both the good side and the bad side. So sometimes, joke in supervising sevens, they very often have been teaching their clients to reframe or cheerleading the client. And I know as a seven, it's my predisposition to cheerlead the client, and it doesn't resource the client from within. So each of us has, our shadow as a coach. And I've seen threes, kind of coaching clients around absolute focus, putting their feelings aside, being efficient, getting results. And it ends up being a form of pressurizing and shaming the client. So I love that you said that. We're not trying to make the client more like us. And that's something to be incredibly aware of in ourselves. Like, where are we judging the client to have a deficient reality strategy? Where are we feeling impatient? Where do we have an agenda? And, for me, this is all informed by the trauma-informed approach, but it's relevant across the board. Yeah.
For me, when I work with somebody, I frame whatever they're doing around their preferred strategy, right? Rather than trying to get them to abandon their preferred strategy or adopt a new one. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, we fall into, if you think about the inner triangle of the Enneagram, and traditionally it's used to demonstrate how we fall asleep to ourselves, right? So at 0.9, we go on autopilot. At 0.6, we feel anxiety. that kind of snaps us out of our stupor. And then at point 3, it represents the narratives of the stories we create about ourselves and about the world that we then embrace, right? And they're usually false stories, okay? And that allows us to go back to sleep, okay? And we're all doing this all the time, all day long, right? Driving in my car, I'm not paying any attention to where I'm going because I'm thinking about all these other things. And then all of a sudden, I kind of wake up and I don't know where I am, and I don't know if I missed my exit or, how I managed to survive long enough to get where I am without paying any attention. And I have this feeling of uncertainty or anxiety. And what do? I look for signals. I look for signs. I look for buildings that are familiar, that reorient me, but give me some sense of, okay, this is what is happening right now, so I can go back to sleep. Okay. Now we're doing this all the time. And what our preferred strategy represents is what the foundational narrative of our story is. Okay. So for me, again, as an Enneagram type 8, the theme that ties together many of my stories is this need to feel powerful. Now, the problem is that the implicit definitions of that I have are immature. They're, to your point, they were the best I had at the time, okay? But they have become outdated. So for me, striving to feel powerful means being strong, being able to vanquish my enemies, being able to take control of situations, etc. But that's just an immature version. So if I want to grow, if I'm working with an 8, let me put it this way, if I'm working with an 8, I'm not going to say to them, you know what, you just have to practice being vulnerable, because that will make you a better person. Because what an 8 is going to tell me in that situation is, you're fired, right? I mean, why are you still in my office? Okay. What we have to do is to say to them, all right, let's think about what it means to feel powerful. Okay? Let's think about how we're defining that. Let's think about how that can limit our behavioral options. Okay. Let's think about how we can redefine what it means to feel powerful in a way that allows us to change our behaviors, to grow, to get more freedom from this constricted, contracted narrative that we have. Okay. But it respects who that person is, right? It doesn't tell them, you know what, you're stupid for trying to feel powerful, or you're not spiritual if you're trying to feel powerful, right? No, it's a strategy that works for me. We just have to redefine it. Okay. But I can't work with somebody who is, say, a 5 and say to them, you know what, you need to start focus on being powerful, because that's not a strategy that appeals to them. So I got to speak their language. Okay. I have to have them work with this. And not only is it, I think, more effective, but it gets me out of the trap of assuming that everybody should be like an 8. Right?
Or, as you say, with 5 being more powerful, you kind of, in your mind, it sounds like, they need to go down the line to 8. There's an agenda there as well,
Right.
Diagnosing them almost as, or implicitly invalidating, criticizing, or shaming their existing personality style. Yeah.
Exactly.
And these things of not spiritual, imposing our worldviews and our values, and whether those things are dictated by the Enneagram normativity or not, it's just disrespectful. So I suppose, for me, the question is knowing what a really healthy 5 looks like, and what the line to the innocence of 8 looks like experientially, having spent a lot of time with 8s who've done a lot of work and are very mature and wise people. I kind of have a very embodied experiential sense of what that looks like, but to in no way dictate, push, or coerce, I suppose, this person in front of me into looking more like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it's all about creating the space for people to move, right? So I do see a huge amount of value in understanding the connecting points, right? So when I'm working with someone, if they're, say, a 5, I'm looking at not only what their relationship is to that strategy at point 5, but what is their relationship to the strategies at point 8 and point 7. Now, at the best of times, we all use those strategies at our own point, our connecting point, in positive ways, right? When I'm at my best, I do the strategy at point 2 in really great ways, and I do the strategy at point 5 in really great ways. But we all know that we're not always at our best, right? When I'm under stress, I start to develop a kind of distorted relationship with those strategies. And it's usually a distortion that has something to do with my own preferred strategy. So if I'm a 5 and I'm striving to feel detached as my kind of preferred strategy, when I look at point 8, striving to feel powerful, I say, well, if I give in to this desire to feel powerful, I'm going to lose control of my emotions, right? I'm going to lose my objectivity and detachment. So I don't want to be like that. I don't want to go there. Okay. And I can also use the strategy at point 7, striving to feel excited, to actually make me more detached from the world, because I'm going to get all excited about ideas. I'm going to get all excited about theories. I'm going to get all excited about abstractions, which again, keep me disengaged from the world. So as I work on my preferred strategy, I start to let go of my distortions around the other 2 strategies. And I start to be able to embody those strategies in a more natural way. Okay? And as I start to watch what happens to me as I interact with those strategies or experience those strategies, it's also a lesson about my narratives and how I'm thinking about things, right? So it's this kind of, exploration and opening up that happens, rather than trying to force it, rather than just saying, you know what, quit being such a 5, jump to point 8 and everything will be fine. No, it doesn't work that way.
Great. So I'm hearing there, releasing some of the resistance to what is reality and what's going on in the context, and recognizing distortion and recognizing strategies of detachment and how those might play out in a 5 specific way, and disengagement, and then being able to become more flexible, have more degrees of freedom, and to self-observe around when there is, I like to think of it as micro-experimentation, with a broader repertoire, with a wider range of options that are more considered and more intentional, that then you say, watch what happens. There's a feedback loop, and I speak about safe to fail experimentation, that with each of these experiments with things that might have been outside one's default repertoire, there's an ability to keep adjusting and to become more responsive to the demands of the context, and less of that adherence to that strategy, less of that. Well, you'd speak about a relationship to one's own strategies, which is really a nice way of thinking about it, is, asking an 8, how do you feel about being tough? And let them explore that, like that's the only way to be. I had one 8 client who said, every single session I had with him, he said, life owes you nothing. And yeah, he's got a good point. So yeah, so that's very helpful. I think I really appreciate what you're saying. I love the ethics.
Yeah, I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I'd like to build off of something you said there about the I'm sorry, the term you used, micro experiments or something, is I talked about the inner triangle representing how we fall into these patterns, but what I started thinking about, again, when we were writing Awareness to Action was, well, if that's how we fall asleep to ourselves, maybe we reverse that pattern, and that's how we grow, right? That's how we change, and created what I call the Awareness to Action process, right? Which is, at point 9, the top of the triangle, instead of falling asleep, I wake up, right? I start paying attention and observing what's happening. At point 3, I practice what we call authenticity, which is all about recognizing conflicting commitments and rewriting our narratives to resolve those conflicting commitments. Very similar to Robert Keegan's work around immunity to change, right? Identifying these internal conflicts. So again, for me as an 8, not just to talk about 8, but I feel more comfortable focusing on my own shortcomings than other people's. It's a story I have is, years ago, my wife would get very frustrated to me. We would go out to Marshall's department store. I don't know, those of you from the United States might be familiar with Marshall's, right? But it's a kind of a discount place where you can get last season's things for cheap, clothes and different sort of things. And for her, this was heaven on a Saturday afternoon, and for me, it was hell. And so by the time we would get to the cashier, I would be in a grumpy mood, right? And I would not be friendly to people. I would just, be kind of remote. And she would say to me, why do you have to be so rude to people? And, and I would argue and say, I wasn't being rude. And she said, that woman was talking to you, you just ignored her, et cetera. We'd get into this argument and our Saturday afternoon would be ruined, right? And I started to realize that for me, this, it would be so easy, theoretically, to start being nicer to people in department stores, right? But it just didn't feel right to me for some reason, because I had this implicit definition of what power means. And it means I get what I want and I don't have to be nice to people, right? And what I wanted was to be out of Marshall's, right? I didn't want to be in Marshall's. I wanted to get out of there. So I recognize this conflicting commitment, okay? I want to be nice so my wife's happy with me, but I want to have control of my time and my energy and my space. So I rewrote the narrative with a very simple, you can be more powerful if you're nice to people, right? And for a normal person, that seems really obvious, right? But for me, it was this profound insight, right? It was like the heavens opened up and taught me something deep, because my narratives were so deeply embedded, right? I say, oh, wow. And so the baby step, the micro experiment, I call them baby steps, right? The action piece is something controllable and manageable. So for me, it was be nice to the clerks at Marshall's, okay? I didn't push myself to be nice to everybody because I knew I would fail at that, right? I didn't even say be nice to the clerks at TJ Maxx and the supermarket and all these other sort of places. It was just Marshall's, right? Because okay, I can track this, I can, work on this. And then what happens is you find yourself accidentally being nice to people in other circumstances, right? Because, we're focused on this one little step. And if I fail, I can take a look at it and say, okay, what went wrong here? And I go through the process again, right? So to your point, it's checking and it's reorienting and it's adjusting, okay, based on those baby steps.
Yes. And there I see that inner triangle is so wonderful for this virtuous circle of
Yes.
9, 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, and it's a kind of spiral into a more and more healthy state as we go along, and as each experiment consolidates and gives us positive feedback and expanded identity. If you use like Cook-Greuter type of language around ego maturation, and as you say, starting with manageable things. And what I also liked is almost a kind of redefinition of power implicit in what you're saying is I'm going to be more powerful if I'm kind. There's a shift there in what power means. I'm just thinking of the 7 equivalent is I'm going to be more joyful. One of the affirmations in Riso's book is I'm happiest when I'm calm and centered. And I mentioned this on our last community of practice session. And that for me was a massive breakthrough as a 7 is I'm happiest when I'm calm and centered. Oh my God, you know, this hypomania is not actually happiness. It's not actually the deep joy. It's a kind of ersatz version. And I suppose if we use more essentialist language, it's about how we're trying to manufacture the essence quality. So that's very much outside a kind of corporate language. But I think if we help our clients to remember or discover in themselves the true version of the thing that they're trying to manufacture, then they have different access point to it somehow.
Yeah. So I completely agree that, so I have a set of accelerators, right? Practices related to each point that help in growth. And for point 7, it's savoring, right? It's learning to sit with something for just a little bit longer, right? Because you're right. What I call the striving to feel excited serves as a substitute for joy. Okay, or a stand-in for joy, because our joy is stunted. And that brings up kind of another topic there that we can get into. But so the way that I settle into this is by practicing savoring, you know. So, okay, I'm going to stop and smell the roses. And if I can only bear stopping and smelling the roses for 10 seconds, well, tomorrow I'm going to try it for 12. Right. And then the next day for 13. And I'm going to practice sitting with something. I'm going to taste this piece of pie in my mouth instead of thinking about, I should have had the cherry instead of the apple, you know, while I'm eating this. Okay? The challenge of the 7 is this persistent frustration with the moment not living up to the expectation or the ideal. So we learn to sit, to savor, just for a moment, for a moment, and then another moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the case of 7, it's not even frustration with the moment here. That's unconscious. We're not even here at all. Right. We're not in the moment to even know whether it's frustrating or not.
Exactly right. I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Somewhere else. Yeah. And I like what you say, your kind of metaphor there. I say ersatz, fabricated, fake. You're saying stand-ins. So the stand-in for joy is the striving, or I just say hypomania, or that excitement, the hyping things up. And so, yeah, this kind of metaphor of our strategy being a substitute for the real thing, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. So the way I like to think of the essential aspects, I do have, again, kind of a theoretical, philosophical difference with, you know, the Neoplatonic assumptions about essentialism, right? You know, the essential aspect. I see them as qualities. I refer to them as core qualities, and there's something that exists in us at birth in an immature form, right? So the joy of the child is not the same as the mature joy cultivated by the adult, right? At point 7, at point, I don't know, point 1, I talk about objectivity, right? So the objectivity of the child is only an absence of prejudice and preconception, okay? But it's not true objectivity, right? We all know that children, babies exist in a subjective state, okay? But the objectivity is there in potential. So we're born like acorns, and we can become an oak tree, but we're not an oak tree, right? I always like to say that an oak tree or an acorn is not an oak tree with an ego. It's just an early stage oak tree that hasn't grown into that yet. Okay. And these core qualities or these aspects exist in us in the same way. They become stunted through our childhood, right? So the vitality at 0.8 becomes, uncomfortable for our parents, right? I mean, I have 4 boys, and I remember one time yelling at my sons, will you all just shut up and go play video games? Right. Because I just couldn't take, these 4 boys throwing balls in the house and all this sort of stuff. Their vitality was, problematic for me. So I did what all good parents do, and I stunted the natural growth and development of my children. Right. So, any parent, take a little comfort, and you're only doing your job, right, to create, trauma and, well, not trauma, but stress in your children in that way. So, so the idea for me is that our big problem around these core qualities is the stunting and us not knowing how to help them mature. And the strategy, I'm not comfortable saying that the strategy is caused by this stunting. I think they're co-emergent, but who knows really? But it does become a substitute, right? So as an 8, because I don't feel vitality inside, because it's stunted and immature, just like it's a sapling rather than an oak tree. Well, I'm going to reach over for this thing that feels similar. This strategy is striving to feel powerful, and I'll substitute it. But it's like I have an itch on my right shoulder, and by trying to make it go away, I scratch my left. Okay. And so it never feels satisfying. So this excitement of the 7 never feels satisfying. It never feels like it's bringing about that joy that I'm actually seeking or trying to reconnect with. Okay. So it's by learning how to, again, recognize our strategies and the patterns that we fall into and how they reinforce this stunting of these core qualities, and what we can do to nurture those core qualities. Just like with a sapling, we would give it water, and we would give it light, and we would give it, soil to help it grow. There are practices we can do to help those things grow as well. Right?
Great, thank you. And in the trauma work, it's really about self-reconnection with our healthy instincts, with our core vitality, and with our core capacities for relatedness, interpersonal connection, our deep vitality and aliveness. And, those are the things that get stunted through these, the interpersonal environment, the context, the early childhood. In the trauma work, it's called deficits in the holding environment in Lawrence Heller's work, which I really like. And in that context, like if we are shaming our children's desire for connection or their sensitivity, grow up, behave, keep quiet, whatever it is, toughen up, that we cause them to trade in those parts of themselves, or there's, obviously there are multiple metaphors for that. But I like what you're saying as well about these core qualities exist in a kind of nascent form. Someone I knew once said, don't mistake the baby for the Buddha. So there's, in the maturation process, there's something conscious and intentional, and Almas actually speaks about it in quite a nice way. He speaks about psychological maturation in terms of our ability to attenuate to our internal process. So we might experience spontaneous joy at times, but we'll know true joy when we're attenuated to our inner experience and not reliant on, contingencies to give us that feeling.
I like to define joy in this core sense as the feeling of well-being independent of external stimulation, right? It's just something I feel. Just it's not because I got a new car, it's not because I got a new toy, it's not because I had a good meal. It's just I just feel it.
And Tom,
And we have to create the space for that by doing this work around our strategy and, other things that create the space for the arising of that.
yes, exactly. And when you talk about the space for the arising in the trauma world, we would talk about that as creating a space of continuity and holding, in which we're kind of redressing some of those deficits in safety, and the person can reconnect and experience. I mean, Tom calls it core state transformation, core transformation. I call it state change, where we're creating the conditions in which someone can self-reconnect. And shame and criticism and prescriptions around behavior or the right kind of personality are going to be the opposite of that, really.
Yeah. You're right. It's so we end up being fooled and looking for substitutes, right, all the time, because we're not only are we often unfamiliar with what the real thing feels like, but we feel shame around it, right? Like with my sons and their vitality, if they start to feel shame around being rambunctious boys, doing what boys do, then, then they'll carry that with them. Okay. And so not only will they, substitute something for it, but they'll actively do it because they feel shame around it. And so again, it's about, helping us understand that these qualities are not something to feel shame about, even though we got that message in some way.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think we also have to understand the difference between the immature version of these things and the mature versions, right? I mean, it's, I love your comment about not mistaking the baby for the Buddha. It's funny because I just hunted down and printed out this article by Robert Keegan, who I mentioned earlier, called Epistemology, Fourth Order Consciousness and the Subject-Object Relationship.
Oh,
Now, if you don't want to run out and read that, I mean,
I
good
do.
heavens, what's wrong with you, right? But he's actually making this very same point, and he criticizes actually Alan Watts's idea of the Buddha baby, right? And he says, no, the baby's not the Buddha, right? The baby might be an immature version of a potential Buddha, okay? But again, the lack of preconception of the baby is not the same as mature objectivity of a developed adult, right? And the same with joy, right? The giggling that the child feels just playing with their toes is not the same joy that an adult feels, right? Through the cultivation of this, the vitality of the child that's undirected and just bouncing off the walls is not the same as the vitality of the adult, okay? That's more focused and purposeful in certain ways.
I love that. And I suppose it would be really nice, I don't know if you've done it, but to really be very clear about those polarities, like lack of preconception in the baby versus a pure objectivity in the adult. Like, what does the baby version look like and what does the mature version look like? Have you mapped that quite explicitly somewhere? Or?
Yeah, it's actually part of our training program, and with each of those, there is this sort of immature version, right? And there are a number of things that help in the maturation of that, right? So these different accelerators. So I talked about 0.7, and a couple of people have said they'd like to hear the other ones. I'm happy to go through those, right? But that's one of the things we do. Also working with the strategies so that we start to let go of these stories, right? Again, creates the space for the cultivation of this. It's like moving the weeds away from the developing sapling. Okay.
Yes.
I'm happy to go through the 9 accelerators if you like, if that's a worthwhile discussion.
Probably people will love that. And for a second, I just want to reflect on where we're going with this, because, you know, our theme is Enneagram in corporates. But if you look at the conversation we've been having, it's got a very therapeutic dimension to it. You know, a lot of people have got a preconception around goal setting and corporate work needing to be quite clinical in the non-psychological sense, or very, you know, just goal-oriented, maybe just linear and mechanistic. But in you talking about creating space, I experience actually in my nervous system in the conversation such a deep ease of being and a sense of spaciousness that, you know, there's a welcomeness that is created through this attitude and through the intention, you know, that in creating space, you know, there's no prescription going on in the way that you're talking.
Yeah. I like to think of the core qualities as the part of the Enneagram that's under the waterline when I'm working with clients, right? So, you know, we think of an iceberg, and there's the part of the ice that's above the waterline that everybody sees and everybody worries about, but there's the stuff that's underneath the waterline that we don't really see. And so even though when I work with someone, I'm focusing on the strategies, right? I'm focusing on that more obvious transactional, prescriptive, you know, sort of things, but always aware of these dynamics that are happening under the surface, even if I'm not explicitly talking about them with the client, right? Sometimes it comes up and it's relevant and important, but 95% of the time it doesn't. It's just something I'm aware that these dynamics are happening as we're talking about this. But the 9 accelerators, these 9 practices, are things that I very often talk to my clients about, right? Because they're, you know, I like to say that they're right on the surface of the water. You know, they are the waterline in a sense of our metaphor. That, yeah, I talk about them. So, you know, with savoring, for example, if I'm working with a 7, you know, it's not uncommon for me to talk about, okay, well, what are some areas in life in which you can start to savor a little bit more? For point 9, for type 9s, the core quality is what I call benevolence, right? It's this kind of fundamental goodness or good intention that gets stunted in the child. And the practice, the accelerator, is generativity, right? It's this idea of helping the other grow. It's, you know, the Erik Erikson idea, you know, he talks about generativity being the sort of grandparenting stage where, okay, it's not about me anymore. You know, I've done my work. I've, you know, kind of, you know, it's now about how can I give to others so they can benefit from my expertise. And this is a transformational practice for 9s because they don't realize that they have something to give.
Exactly.
Right? They're so busy putting themselves down and minimizing themselves that when they start doing this, when they start mentoring, when they start, you know, working with younger people in the organization without some expectation of return, without you know, some you know, obligation to do it, they start to realize, hey, wait a minute, you know, I have some things going on here, right? I do have good intention toward others.
Yes.
Right? Point 2.
Just before you go on, Mario, what I'm really noticing is the quality of the language and what a departure it is from the Neoplatonic and religious type of language. So when I hear benevolence, I hear, oh, he's translated holy love into benevolence. Oh, he's translated right action into generativity. And these words that you're using, just like your words for the instincts, are so human and so relatable. And I really love that. I mean, in your terminology around the instincts, I've completely incorporated into my work. And clients love it. They get it. It makes sense. It lands. Whereas, you know, the kind of traditional Enneagram language is very esoteric and doesn't land well at all. So, I mean, I don't know, do you have a slide or something with these cool things, or do you just want to talk through them as you are? So 9 was...
Yeah, I do, but I'd have to kind of dig it up, right? So, so if you want to give me a couple of minutes, I can find and show a slide. I don't know if there, you know, you want to do something to kill a little bit of time while I'm doing that.
I think what maybe while you're digging around, we can just open the floor and see if there are any questions, or really like something that might really be standing out for you and landing for you, if anyone wants to comment on what they're hearing so far. I mean, Mario and I have been in dialogue, haven't opened any questions or reflections. So if anybody's really had an aha moment or something that's really landed for you, a question, please raise your hand and let's hear, especially people who do a lot of corporate work. Don't be shy.
Or if you think I'm full of crap, I'm always interested in hearing that too. So.
Okay, Alistair, thank you.
Cool, thanks. So I got trained in the Enneagram because I wanted to use it as a diversity and inclusion tool, right? So here was my thinking. So, I mean, power is a huge topic in D&I circles, right? So let's take an 8 for an example, right? So let's say you have an 8 who's an authority figure, I don't know, unleashing power and, you know, whatever term it is, right? So my strategy is to say, rather than seeing someone's skin color or race rather, if you are in a corporate space and you say, and you realize that the person is an 8, for example, then they're just being an 8. And then that creates a new identity, a new lens to see things through. But listening to your earlier conversation now, you're sort of discouraging these labels. So then how do I now use this as a D&I tool in the corporate space? That's my challenge.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. And you know, I'm always very cautious about venturing into these waters, you know, because it's not an area of my expertise. And, you know, quite frankly, I think I'm the last person who should be talking about diversity and inclusion matters, you know, sometimes. But so it's not that I'm necessarily discouraging the recognition of a pattern, but urging against the stereotypical over-reliance on a label that can be used in maladaptive and, you know, limiting ways, right? So for me, it's okay to recognize that, yes, somebody's an 8. But what we mean by that is that it's a person who is just very human, who falls into the pattern of striving to feel powerful. And sometimes it means that they act in this way or that way, right? So it's both recognizing the surface and understanding what's behind that surface, right? So, you know, so I think that actually by starting with that recognition of the label, it can help us understand what's behind it rather than stopping there, if that makes sense. And am I helping you in this area, Alistair, or am I talking in circles here? Let me know.
No, you're making a lot of sense. I guess it then means we need to do more deeper work with the teams, and not just do a quick fix of maybe a workshop for 2 days where now everybody knows each other's numbers.
Yes.
But to actually have a longer process of understanding people's realities.
Yes. Yes.
Challenge.
You know, for example, I mean, it's easy for me to say, okay, Alistair is a Black man. And so let me extrapolate what that is. Or I could say, so tell me about yourself, Alistair, you know, so let me understand you. Yes, you're a Black man. And what does that mean? How does that manifest? How does that influence your life, et cetera? Help me understand those things, right? So the Enneagram type is just in a sense, it's a way in to starting the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation by any means, right? Is where we should be going with this, I think.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Thank you, both of you. And then I saw Sandy had her hand up, and then Carl and Lauren. Let's hear Sandy. I saw you commenting on Keegan. Maybe you can just tell us whether you work with the Enneagram in corporates. You seem to, from our discussions on Facebook. Love to hear a little bit about your work as a contextualization for whatever you want to add or ask.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to comment quickly on the conversation we were just having around using the Enneagram and DEI work. I was thinking when it first came up at the beginning of the call that for groups who already have a little bit of stereotyping going on with the Enneagram, sometimes in DEI work, it can actually be helpful to bring their existing stereotypes around types up, because it frequently can be a non-triggering way of talking about implicit bias, and helping people see, because usually in corporate environments, they're not super attached to the Enneagram yet. And so it can be an externalized way of showing how implicit bias happens and can take effect in groups. And then it can also be useful if they're less familiar with the Enneagram to, as Mario was saying, learn a little bit about their individual experiences, because regardless of race, I think we all have aspects of our identities or places in our environments in our lives where we are marginalized. It could be in our family, it can be at work, it can be at church, it can be walking down the street. And so getting people to access their experiences of ways in which they're marginalized can open that conversation, and then use Enneagram to talk about our responses to being marginalized, which might differ by type. So those are just the things that came up when I was experiencing conversation. I am a relatively new coach. I kind of grew up in the corporate world. I've worked for a Fortune 50 technology company as the first phase of my career, and that was a blessing and a curse. But I worked in new hire and corporate training and development, and also in sales and marketing leadership. And through those pieces of my career, became essentially, I had to be a coach as a manager, and have always gravitated towards more of an educational and developmental approach just in my entire strategy towards life. And right now I don't have any clients. The pandemic, my husband and I've been flexing. So I've been doing a lot of learning during the pandemic. But as far as the Keegan model, the way that the Keegan model of adult development has been helpful, and there are several coaches and coaching leaders that talk about it, like Jennifer Garvey-Berger is one, is it can be helpful when you go into a larger corporate environment, say businesses with 500 or more employees have usually reached the stage where they are kind of being forced to take an organizational development approach. They have passed the scrappy, just get things done phase, and they're into the, oh my God, we have 500 people, we're a small city worth of people, we got to learn about each other phase. And you usually have a diverse range of ages. And it can be helpful as a coach coming into those environments, as you said, to do a little bit of fact finding and kind of a 360 on the organization, understand what they're trying to accomplish, understanding who's on the teams that you'll be interacting with. And then if you can have some individual interactions, learn a little bit about where this person seems to be kind of in their meaning making journey. Are they really early, or and that doesn't always correlate with age. Sometimes they can be, 60 years old and still be early in their meaning making journey. But just kind of assess like where are these individuals, and then that can help you customize your approach as a coach. Because people who are fairly early in their meaning making journey don't always have a lot of exposure or haven't internalized exposure to alternative ways of making meaning. They think their reality is their reality. And so just if you have a team that's comprised of a number of people at that stage, just opening with introductions and understanding, and then a loose exposure to alternative meanings or potential meaning making realities can at least open the conversation to, oh yeah, we exist in a world in which there are multiple ways of making meaning, and then you can move from there. It really depends on what this, as Mario was saying, what is this team trying to do? Because if you open it up too far, then you might not get done what they need you to get done in the time that you're contracted to work with them. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Sandy. That was really great. And what I'm proposing from a process perspective now is that we take the other questions and comments, and then Mario create space for you to kind of thread together any common themes, and I'll also try and do that, because I think what we could do is go completely into the DI conversation, and maybe there's some other tracks here that link in an interesting way. So I hope that's okay from a kind of facilitation perspective. I just want to ask you, Alistair, in response to what Sandy offered us here, which was, I think, for me, very, very rich. Is that landing for you? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think, as you know, I'm also trained in that Euphoria maturity framework. So it's also based on the Keegan model to some extent. So the whole goal is to marry the Enneagram with the maturity adult development stuff. So it's just trying to weave all this together into something that is impactful from a D&I perspective. That's my current challenge.
Great. Sandy, I don't know if you know Euphoria, they've got something called the AIM assessment, which is a combination of the Enneagram and ego maturity and expanded identity. And they draw very strongly on Keegan, Cook-Greuter, Garvey-Berger, all of that. So I've put, I'm going to put in the thing here, I don't know the email address, the web address offhand, but if you look up Euphoria AIM assessment, they've got training in this whole approach, and it brings them together very beautifully, the vertical development, and they use it a lot in corporates. So yeah, thanks, Christo. So yeah, this is wonderful stuff. So let's see what other themes and questions are emerging, and then see how we tie together. I'm just looking at time. I always can carry on for very many hours. I want to assume Mario can, or anyone else can. So let's hear. I had Carl next. What were you hearing? What did you want to add?
So I really enjoyed when Mario first started, when he talked about emphasizing strategy in organizations, like looking at the Enneagram as each of the Enneagram types as strategies, and in helping organizations understand, land, abide, subscribe to it. Right. And the other thing I wanted to respond to, first of all, is to thank, where did she go? She disappeared from my screen.
Are you talking about Sandy?
Yeah.
Wave, Sandy.
Oh, there she is. to thank Sandy for all the resources that she was putting into the chat for Keegan and adult development theory. And the third quick comment was for Alistair is to also focus on the fact that we don't just have that one strategy, and that's the only strategy that we have within us, but how can we access the beauty of all of the other 8 strategies, right? From the diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, is to understand that even though we may focus on one, or we may have one that we have as our default, that we do have access to all of the other 8 as well to some extent. And how can we incorporate, integrate, really access those in a way to help us be more inclusive, as opposed to just focusing on our own individuality or fixation.
Thank you.
That was it.
Thank you. Great. And then I had Lauren next, and then Caroline.
I just wanted to come back on the D&I question and Alistair's contribution around how could we use the Enneagram in that space. And in D&I, when you've got in corporate environments, you've got different groups, whether it's race, gender, cognitive, thinking differently, coming from different perspectives. There's a whole range of diverse perspectives, and the Enneagram. I'm fascinated by Alistair's plan, because with diversity and inclusion, the reason for it, or the requirement for it in a corporate environment, is that we are so wedded to our own lens, our own belief system, and our own way of being in the world, that having a tool that allows us to have common humanity and to speak and being and seeing each other in that group, or ourselves in that group, aside from all the other labels that we are attributed, or we attribute to ourselves, I think is quite powerful. So to me, in the D&I space, having a common humanity through a tool like the Enneagram is powerful. The only caution, and I think coming back to Mario and your conversation, Ingrid, is how do you create that space in that group? Is it outside of a corporate office? And how do you retain the trust and the transparency and the safety that you can actually have a depth of conversation and understanding to then bring that back to a corporate environment? And so I think there's lots of challenges around it, but I think the richness and the opportunity is significant. So I work in corporate environments, and we're looking at all kinds of different groups and how we can bring them into the opportunities that are there, people who've been locked out of them. And there are lots of different people who have been historically. So that was just my thinking. So thank you, Alistair, for raising that.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that the conversation has taken this turn towards diversity, inclusion, appreciation of difference. And you there, Lauren, illustrating how core that is to the work overall. So that's great. Seeing each other's safety. I heard you raising the issue there of creating the space, and I think alluding to the depth of these conversations and making it safe in a corporate environment. I mean, I have particular views on the distinction between teamwork around things like the harmonics and the kind of individual, the one-on-one conversations where a client may well share some of the early childhood experiences that, gave rise to a particular or necessitated a particular reality strategy. So, that might be a whole topic. And I think that's something I'll take into the community of practice, kind of follow on to this. Another thing that I just wanted to raise there, and I don't want to derail this because I'm supposed to be facilitating and getting on to the other questions, but a thing of diversity and inclusion not just being reduced to an individual level. So it's like we've all felt marginalized, or, you know, we're all the same, that there are genuine socio-historical traumas, collective and intergenerational traumas that have resulted from things like colonialism, dispossession, genocide, that we give voice to that. When Sandy was speaking, I spoke about, what came to mind was Miranda Fricker's work on epistemic justice, that we really respect voices around socio-historical issues as well. So we don't reduce it to, you're an 8, I'm a 7. No, I actually come from a family where, you know, there was security police, you know, did things to my family, and, you know, the apartheid history, for example, and it's not just South Africa. So I just want to, there's a caveat that I have there around reducing things to individual personality that actually have a context and a history. And we need to locate our corporate work within the broader social context. So that's just an aspect of collective trauma that I think we need to be able to be with that as people working in corporates, and not think that we can sanitize our corporate work to be apolitical. So, I mean, that's my perspective. It's open to a whole lot of discussion. But let me, Carl, is your hand up again? Must I put you on the list? Okay. Let's go on to Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. And first of all, thank you both, Mario and Ingrid and Carl, for sharing your wisdom. Mario in particular, I've really cherished listening to you and really feeling the resonance of the depth of your wisdom in my nervous system, if I can say that. And so when Ingrid, when you were speaking about noting the language that Mario was using, that really struck a chord with me. And so I think what I would like to do is to share, and actually, first of all, just really appreciating the thread of conversation around the diversity. Lauren, in particular, your thinking around that, because actually what I put down as a top point for myself is thinking about multidimensionality of people, how we've moved so far beyond the gender, the ethnicity, the sexual orientation. It's so much deeper, broader, wider. And I think that's when I started falling in love with the Enneagram, was because it lets me play in that field of multi-dimensionality of a human being. And I loved your point, Ingrid, around thinking more broadly, not just reducing it to an individual level. But I have a piece to share, and then I think a question for you, Mario, in the realm of language. So yesterday I was having a conversation with a former client of mine who is in financial crime compliance. Now, financial crime compliance can be incredibly dry and boring, and actually fear motivating individually and organizationally. And yet he had this beautiful language and was giving these incredible examples that connected with the heart. And so I was recognizing that in what he was saying, in his examples. And at a point he said to me, Caroline, it's so important to speak in a real language so that people can be themselves in their own language. And while that really resonated with me, because again, being in financial crime compliance, you have people from all walks of life, all ethnicities. You have to work together because of the interconnectivity of financial crime. And it really resonated with me because I've seen in an organization with regulators how fear constricting it can be. And I know from having worked from him that he shows a different way, and a number of the other leaders did as well, where you connect with the heart. And so that is both calming for the nervous system. It opens up the creativity, the more generative problem solving. So I feel like it's so important. And my question for you, Mario, then is in all this work that you've been doing and your thoughtfulness around the language that you use, what work, if any, have you done where you've been more intentional about connecting with heart in particular, maybe even with the gut, that helps to dampen or soften our very strong default into strategic thinking, rational thinking, analytical thinking, which is so prevalent in our Western corporations. And I think that's a piece I'm so curious, is how to shift a language that connects with heart and broader intelligence for a different kind of conversation.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thank
So
you.
let's hand it over to you, Mario. I see, like, can you draw things together? What's arising?
I'm trying to think of how to put all of this into one response here without going a lot of different directions. So
different directions. It's no
yeah.
problem.
So first of all, thank you for those nice words, Caroline. And I want to point out that one of the reasons I work so hard to find simple language is because it's not my default, right? It's, I can easily fall into throwing big words at people. Sometimes it's just out of laziness. Sometimes it's out of, frustration. Sometimes it's wanting to show off how smart I am, right? But it's always, I actually have a writing background, right? I started off as a writer and editor. So, I tried to learn early the message that you're only a good communicator if other people are understanding what you're saying, right? And they're getting the point that you want them to get. And the best way to do that is through, whenever possible, using simple, concrete terms. This doesn't mean that there aren't situations where you need to use or can benefit from using more complex or more technical terms, but whenever possible, try to make it simple, right? So I think it's simplicity that actually helps speak to the heart and to the body in a sense, because it's concrete rather than abstract, right? And so if I can get the right word, it touches you here in the heart instead of up here in the head. Okay? I don't know how to, when it comes to the strategies, I always say that it starts with a feeling, right? So I want to feel powerful. And therefore, I start thinking in ways that will help me feel powerful. And then I start acting in ways that make sense according to this logic I have to feel a certain way. But when we're working with someone, we almost have to work in through the head in order to get to the heart and the gut, right? I have to create space by opening these stories and then creating practices that will cultivate these heart qualities that we're talking about. And this example of generativity that I talked about is a way of doing that, right? You practice generativity and you start feeling something in here and in the belly as well that touches those. Okay, so, but for me, it starts with working with the head, or they're working with ideas and then using those to access the heart. Okay, but again, I want to be real clear that I fall short of this, goal quite frequently, which also gets me to the D&I part of this conversation, which I find is fascinating. And I think it's important for each one of us to understand our limitations and kind of work within our lanes, right? When it comes to this conversation, I'm just a loudmouth sitting at the bar, who really doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm happy to share my opinions with you, but they're not informed, right? They're not useful. necessarily. I mean, maybe we can glean a little bit of wisdom. I really liked what Lauren said about the Enneagram being something that reminds us of our common universal language. I've taught the Enneagram in Korea and in China and all over Europe and in South America and the Middle East and in the US. And the one thing we find is that no matter where you go, no matter what color people are, no matter what language they speak, the Enneagram is a common language. And so perhaps that can provide a foundation, to make us more open to then what might be a better tool for understanding D&I issues, right? I mean, maybe the Enneagram's not a good tool for that, okay? And maybe trying to map something onto the Enneagram for that purpose might be a distraction. Again, I don't know, right? But I think that, again, it's important for me to acknowledge the limitations of my experience and knowledge on this topic, right? Look, I'm a middle-aged white guy from the United States who's a type 8, and I'm 6'2", which is pretty tall. I'm a big, it's like, it's going to be harder for me than for most people to point out, experiences of being marginalized. I mean, it's just that, I'm that's just not my thing. Okay, so this is a place where I'm happy to learn rather than to talk, okay, quite frankly.
Thanks so much, Mario, and thanks, Caroline, for that point. Really, really helpful. Asking about how to connect at a heart level, and Mario there just emphasizing the simplicity and making things concrete. And I think there in the language, the quite tangible metaphors in the simplicity. It kind of reminded me of all the religious teachers using little parables. We remember loaves and fishes. We don't remember abstract, treatises about whatever, the point was being made. So that's really great. And if I can also respond to Caroline with a bit of Enneagram theory, which I've found to be true experientially and in my coaching about these 3 centers, is that when the body feels safe in the here and now, this is also from the trauma work, and you speak about nervous system downregulation and bringing other parts of the brain online, our creativity, the neurophysiology of creativity, that when we become safe in the body, because of the presence of a coach and a skillful facilitator, and we experience that ease, then, our creative awareness, our higher cognitive functions can come online. And in Enneagram terms, it's when both of those are awake and doing their job that the heart feels safe to open. So that's my experience of the kind of sequencing towards heart opening, is deal with the other 2 centers first, and the heart will open spontaneously because it wants to. We're kind of wired for connection and attunement and attachment. It's so fundamental to what we are as creatures. So I just wanted to offer that from my Enneagram perspective to specifically what you were saying, Caroline. So I just want to see where we are for time. So we're close to 9 p.m. South African time, and I think we scheduled until 9:30. Originally, I envisaged speaking about positioning the Enneagram in terms of business relevance, so making a specific strategic link, and so I've, as usual, created a gazillion slides around that. I don't know if that's still a relevant topic, or if there are other areas here that you want to deepen and continue with. So
are we going to let Mario share his slide that he went and dug up?
Yeah, did you find it, Mario? Thanks for bringing that back, Sandy. Do you have it, Mario? Did you find it?
I did, yeah. So I have a few slides, and I'll be happy to kind of run through.
Brilliant. Cool.
Yeah.
So I think that will probably be a while. Maybe someone just said keen to see your slides. Let's leave that for the next community of practice, my slides, because they're quite a lot, and it's mostly about joining the dots between the Enneagram work and the business strategy and the context. So I think that'll take us quite far off what we've been speaking about here. So I would propose that we carry on with Mario's accelerators, if that's okay.
So, so sure. So what I'll do is I'll talk about the immature version of the core quality and the mature version, and then the accelerator that helps kind of, with the development there. So you'll bear with me here.
Awesome, thanks.
Can everybody see my slides?
Yeah.
All right. So, so the accelerator point one is what we call objectivity, right? It is seeing things as they are, free from prejudices, preconceptions, projections, transferences, especially, right? Child is born into the world, and again, they're not in an objective state, they're in a subjective state, but they have an immature version of what it means to be objective, okay? I haven't learned to hate certain kinds of people yet, okay? I haven't learned to, not like certain things. So, the immature version of that, again, is just simply a lack of preconceptions. The mature version of it is recognition and management of our subjectivity. Okay, the ability to say, I'm falling into this subjective state here, let me step back. And the accelerator for that, and let's see here if I have these. Yeah, so it's, I'm going to have to kind of fill in the accelerator, so I apologize, but I can send something to you guys if you want. The accelerator here is acceptance, right? It's learning to accept things as they are without anger, frustration, emotion, disappointment, etc. So the point one, the type one, benefits from understanding, you know what, I'm not as objective as I think I am. I think I'm objective, but I'm really just filling my head with a bunch of rules. And I will grow and become more objective when I learn to accept things. This does not mean that I simply abdicate the desire to change, the desire to grow, the desire to improve, but I do it from a place of kind of equanimity and objectivity rather than anger. Okay, I become actually more effective, more objective by accepting that the world is the way it is, right? I can change it, but I can only be effective at changing it if I am not angry about it. Okay, does that make sense? Point two is compassion. Okay, union with the emotional states of others. All right. A baby in the maternity ward, one baby starts crying, the others start crying, right? We have this quality of emotional resonance with each other. I can feel what other people are feeling until it becomes stunted, right? It starts to become stunted because I have to find ways to protect myself. Ingrid and I were just in Egypt, right? And if you go to parts of Cairo, it's heartbreaking, the things you see, the way people are living, right? The poverty, the sickness, etc. Life is painful if we don't know how to protect ourselves from reflexive compassion. So we start to build walls, right? We start to harden ourselves in some ways. Compassion becomes stunted. And the practice is, the accelerator is cognitive empathy. It's not just emotional empathy, where, let's see, so I'm looking at Tim right now. Tim, you look cold. Here, take this blanket. And Tim says, well, no, I'm not cold. I'm fine. No, Tim, you're cold. I can tell. Okay. I'm trying to be empathetic. I'm feeling that Tim is cold, so I am responding to it, but that's not real empathy. Cognitive or mature, cognitive empathy is, hey, Tim, are you cold? Would you like a blanket? And I check my intuitions, right? I check my empathic impulses and calibrate them accordingly. Okay. And if Tim says, no, I'm fine, I might say, are you sure? It's not a problem. I can get you a blanket. But if he says no again, okay, fine. Real empathy is saying, okay, he's not cold, right? And this, again, cultivates real compassion, mature compassion, because it's now not just a reflexive compassion, but an intentional and thoughtful compassion. Point 3 is all about value, okay? The feeling of worth, independent of accomplishment. You bring a baby into the room, the baby does not have to do anything, but we all treasure it, right? We all see it as something inherently valuable, okay? And if you think about what babies do, it's not that great, right? I mean, they poop, they cry, they keep you awake at night, I mean, they're kind of an irritating, a presence in your life, but we still value them. But as life goes on, we start to lose contact with that value, right? So instead of, kind of a self-centered importance that the child feels, it's their feeling of value becomes stunted. And now we have to start performing to demonstrate our value. And what the 3 is experiencing is, I am only worthwhile if you think I am worthwhile, if I am meeting your expectations, exceeding those expectations, if I'm being outstanding in some way. Okay. So the accelerator that helps them achieve what we call a self-possessed achievement, meaning I'm achieving things, but I'm doing it because I am owning this. It's something I want. It's the practice of purpose, finding meaning, finding, what is it that I want to accomplish that's driving me? What is motivating me at a deep level? And what this does for the 3 is it helps them to stop just doing and doing and doing and doing, right? I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this because it'll make me feel more valuable. And instead they have some sense of purpose where they say, you know what, here's what I'm trying to accomplish in life. Here's what's meaningful to me. And this helps me to set my priorities. I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that because that doesn't satisfy my purpose. That's just an ego-driven activity. So I'm not going to do it because it's not purposeful. Right? So the accelerator for the 3 is creating a purpose statement of some sort. Right? And always letting them know that this is something that has to come from you, right? It's not something you find outside. It's not something that's revealed to you, something that you develop. And it can change over time. I always tell them, write it in pencil, right? Write it on a piece of paper. You're not carving it into stone. Right? It can change. It should change and grow as you do. Let's see, point 4. Let me, bear with me a second. Oops. Point 4 is individuality. Every child has its own fingerprint, has its own footprint. When my sons were born, the first thing they do, they clean them off and they take a footprint, right? Why? So they can identify the child should they need to, because every child is inherently an individual. But we start losing sight of that. We start believing that, you know what, I'm just like this person, I'm just like that person, and I need to point out how I am different. I need to contrast myself with other people. I am not like my mother. I am not like my father. And this is kind of the internal soundtrack of the 4, right? Instead of just being an individual because they can't help but be otherwise, they have to start proving that they are different. They have to start proving they're unique. So the immature version of individuality is what we call a de facto distinction, meaning I'm just different. Can't help it, right? Even though I want it to be. Okay, I'm different. My wife has very good friends who are identical twins. And, if I see one of them, I can't tell which one it is, right? And even when they're standing next to each other, if they're wearing the same clothes, they're really similar. But when you get to know them, they're different, right? I mean, everybody is different. So the practice for the 4 is disidentification. It's learning to recognize the labels I put on myself, the comparisons I make, and to learn to let go of them, to start to shed them, one at a time. Right? Here I go again. I'm comparing myself to my mother. I'm contrasting myself to my mother. Let it go. Right? And that's when we we start to realize that I cannot help but just express my individuality. Right? So a spontaneous, natural unfolding, we call it. Right? Point 5 is intuition. Okay. Immature intuition is naive assumption. I can fly that plane, right? I can, I can jump from here to there, right? It just, I know what's best for me, all these sort of things. My sons are, let's see, 18, 16, 15, and 12. And they all think they know how to drive a car until they get behind the wheel of a car. And they realize, well, crap, I don't know anything, right? But they have these intuitions about what it's like, but those intuitions are not trustworthy, right? So immature intuition is naive assumption. Okay? Now, of course, we get these messages from our children, from our holding environment that, you know what, you can't trust your gut. You can't trust your intuitions because you're just a dumb kid. You don't know anything. You don't know what's best for you. I know what's best for you, right? So in particular, the 5, but all of us start to lose trust in our own inner wisdom, sometimes with good reason, right? Thank goodness we have people to keep us from doing things that are stupid, right? But it stunts the development of our intuition, and particularly for 5s, it's all in the head, right? It's not in the belly. So mature intuition comes about through conscious practice, right? You want to be an intuitive jazz musician, okay? You want to be John Coltrane or Miles Davis, practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. And then you will develop real intuition, okay? But it's not just reading about music, okay? It's not just talking about music, it's playing music. Same thing with a sport. You want to be a good tennis player, you want to be an intuitive tennis player, get out there and practice and practice and practice and practice. And this is what the 5 needs to learn, is the accelerator. What is a conscious practice? I had a client who was a 5 one time, and brilliant guy, nice guy. I mean, this guy just was a great guy. I loved talking to this guy, right? But all of his subordinates would say, he's unapproachable. I don't know how to talk to him. He doesn't know how to talk to us. And so I said to him one day, you know what, John, we need to go out and we need to start developing your small talk skills, right? And he said, oh, that's a great idea. How do I do it? I said, well, once a day, you're going to go out, you're going to walk around the office, you're going to pick one person to just have a conversation with. Oh, it's a great idea. But what do I say? Right? Well, okay. So we had to make a list of topics for him to talk about, right? We have to put a plan together for him. So again, it was practice. And then eventually he became intuitive at it. He learned how to do it. And this is the way it works for us. Point 6 is confidence, right? Children, again, have not learned that the world is a dangerous place. This doesn't mean they don't have fear and anxiety, but they haven't learned that you shouldn't go to that neighborhood. You shouldn't talk to those kind of people. My father was born in pre-war Poland, lived through World War II, some very traumatic times, and was very traumatized by the whole thing. But he had this substantial fear of gypsies. Right? I don't know why, but I got this message during my childhood: never trust gypsies. I didn't even know what a gypsy was, right? I didn't encounter any gypsies in rural or suburban Pennsylvania, right? But I knew to be afraid of gypsies, right? Because my father drilled that into my head. Or never sneeze while you're driving because bad things will happen, right? So we get this stunting of our confidence, right? When we start to hear about all the dangers. Now, the immature version of confidence is just not knowing or understanding or recognizing threat. What do you mean I can't run with scissors? What do you mean I can't play with matches? What could happen? Mature confidence comes about through the accelerator of seeking evidence. And what I mean by this is I always work with 6s to make a list of their accomplishments, to make a list of the things they've achieved. So they remind themselves, they recognize, just to give an example, you have to give a speech. Oh, you got all this anxiety. Oh, I'm going to fail at it. It's going to be terrible. Okay. Have you ever given a talk before? How did it go? What's the evidence, pro and con? Okay. If you were successful at it in the future and in the past, well, what do you need to repeat so that you'll be successful here? If it went horribly, what went horribly? How can we fix that, right? So it's about putting concrete steps and evidence and reality in their world for them to remember. Okay. And so the mature version of confidence is appropriate preparation. We shouldn't just venture into the world unprepared, but our preparations need to be appropriate with the threat. Yes. Point 7, joy, core quality, right? Again, whimsical pleasure, is kind of with the baby. I'm playing with my toes, all is great, I'm happy. But we start to get these messages that, what are you so happy? I remember my mother saying to me as a child, what are you laughing about? Right? I'm just happy, right? Well, you shouldn't do that. Okay. So the 7 gets this message that feeling good for internal reasons is not enough, right? That you feel good because you achieved something. You feel good because you got something. You feel good because I gave you some candy, right? We start to get rewards for, these sort of things. So there are different, we start to externalize our source of joy. The practice, again, is savoring, right? Learning to sit with something, okay? Be with the experience in the moment. Okay? And that allows us to develop a mature joy, which I refer to as attentive heartfulness. Right? Point 8 is vitality. The immature vitality is I like to say, it's like a fire hose with no one holding on to it, right? Just spraying all over the place, making a mess. Okay. And this is what, the vitality of the childhood can feel like. And like I said, that I did with my sons is, the holding environment, or wants to smash it, wants to restrain that, right? Wants to tamp that down. The child has a million questions, right? They have lots of energy. They want to break things to see what happens. Okay. And they get the message to stop, sit in your seat, right? We send them off to school, and they have to sit there all day and listen to a teacher, right? All these restraints we put on them. Okay. So in order to incorporate or to develop that, the core quality we call self-discipline. Now, this sounds kind of ironic because it feels like a tamping down of this, but it's getting into the habit of a practice of some sort, so that energy has a direction to it. Right? It's like putting hands on the fire hose. We're not turning off the fire hose. We're letting the fire hose go, but we're putting hands on it. So I always encourage 8s to develop some sort of practice, study a martial art, take music lessons. Islam means submission, right? So it's submission to a practice as a good example of a way of taking that vitality from something that's potentially destructive to managing this life force that we have. Okay. So a healthy, mature 8 is someone who just exudes energy that doesn't feel destructive or disruptive. It feels constructive instead. Finally, point 9 is benevolence, basic goodness, then the Buddhist concept, good intent. Bene means good, volence, intent, right? So it's good intent toward others. The 9 starts to get these messages that, you're not lovable, you're not good, right? You don't intend well, you're selfish. Okay? So the 9 starts to feel like, geez, I can't do any good here, so I might as well just stay out of the way. Okay? And this is the problem with the 9. It's this kind of it's kind of a suicide, right? Of, well, if I can't be good, at least I'll do no harm. Okay, so they become passive, they become self-deprecating. And it's this practice of, generativity that helps to release and nurture that feeling of benevolence. Right? So I just realized that I have this chart here. Maybe I can send this to all of you that kind of captures all those points that I just made.
Oh, thank you. I'm grabbing a screenshot if that's okay, Mario.
Yeah, sure. No worries. So that's that's the core qualities and accelerators in a nutshell. Right? How fast did I do that?
That
18
was
minutes.
brilliant. Wow. I just want to ask you, while we've got a bit of time around this, I think everyone is just absolutely fascinated and absorbed and thrilled with your work, because it brings such new relevance and language, and it's substantive in some way. That these, when we talk about the vices and the fixations and the holy ideas, it's kind of abstracted, and the language that you're using just lands it fully. So I'd just like to ask you about your courses and your resources. I know when I was in Egypt with you and I saw your workbook that you have produced, that you actually give to your clients, where can people get your stuff? Where can they sign up for your courses? Where do we go to find out more, etc.?
Yeah. So it's funny because we have traditionally done a certification program, and I just decided to kind of revamp it, and we'll be rolling out the new version of it in September. So if you want to get onto my mailing list, or, send me an email at mario@awareness-to-action.com. And we have a website, awareness-to-action.com. There's a blog there. There's YouTube stuff. And frankly, my pride and joy is my Enneagram in a Movie podcast. So if you have an interest in movies and you're interested in learning about the Enneagram through the medium of film, you might want to check that out, the enneagraminamovie.com, or Spotify or wherever. But feel free to reach out to me, and I'm actually having a website created in the near future, mariosikora.com. So I'm going to kind of put everything in one place there. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, Mario. And having some self-praise opportunism in me, will you give the South Africans a bulk discount?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. I've got this on tape. I've got this recorded.
All right, great.
We're going to hold you to it.
Great.
Oh, that's brilliant. So starting in September, a certification in your approach for using the Enneagram in corporate.
Yeah, so we're so just for what it's worth, what we're doing is one of the things that has happened over the past 2 years as we've been doing this our certification program online is that we get two different audiences, one that's interested in self-development, one that's interested in actual, corporate work. So we're actually dividing the program and doing one that's going to be focused on corporate work, and one that is, kind of broader and talking about self-development, but not so much the corporate world. So so that's where we're going with this. And, like I said, reach out to me, and if you do remind me that you were in this session that Ingrid hosted, we'll give you a discount. So
yeah, we'll organize a whole cohort to come your way.
You
So that's wonderful. And I think that split is really nice, because then it's more application oriented. You probably get people who've been doing this for a while. They're not new to the Enneagram. And the self-development is happening in parallel anyway in their supervision and personal work. So that sounds really, really great. Thank you. I'm sure we'll all be looking into that. So let's see, we've got a few more minutes. I'd love to please get everybody to put some comments in the chat around what you're taking away, and have a bit of a checkout. We've got 12 minutes before the closing time. I'd just love to get some reflections. People who've been very quiet, I'd love to hear from you, Christo. I know you've designed facilitator training. You've done tons of workshops with teams. What's really hitting home for you? Are there any mindset shifts, anything happening for you that you can share?
I think what struck me, and many has mentioned it, Mario, is the language. I love this language. I love this language of benevolence. As an Enneagram 9, I love the language of benevolence. And all the language. Also being a writer myself, and this search for language that that speaks really directly. I loved it all. I don't have anything very specific much to say about this further. I enjoyed the session immensely.
Thanks so much, Christine. Yeah. And I'd like to ask you, Ray, because I know you have gone now, you're moving from trauma counseling and relationship counseling into corporate work. I'd love to hear what's been empowering for you in terms of your transition that you're making potentially.
So just listening to the talk, I'm very aware that I'm going in with a machete, just flattening. So I'm running a workshop if anybody's interested in signing up on exactly not what to do. And you'll probably so it's been really helpful just to kind of just slow it down and this kind of movement of the violence of my approach to be able to say, this is where I want you to be and this is how you can be. And just like take a bit of a slower engagement into the system. And I think it's got to do with confidence as well. I think when the tool of the Enneagram gets so foregrounded that I lose sight of the actual people in the room.
Wow.
And so it's been so I'm in a huge learning curve at the moment. So tonight is really very helpful. Definitely.
Wow, thanks, Ray. And it's a really vulnerable self-disclosure. I mean, I know you from other contexts, and all your work is about the safe container and that sensitivity and the spaciousness and your trauma healing work. To even hear the word violence used around you is kind of very disorienting. But I think there, that exploration of, is this related to insecurity, to needing to cultivate a certain persona? And I mean, I'm just relating that to, when I work in a balance sheet management team, kind of putting on this tough guy persona, which is actually, so it sounds like you might be lured into something similar from what you're saying.
No, I think it's like that need to look professional. And to look as if you know what you're doing, and confidence and all of that stuff, and having to have all the answers. So when Mario was talking about, that's not quite my area of expertise, and the whole idea of what I can give you a very well unresearched opinion. That gives me a little bit of room to wiggle and say, I actually don't know everything, but I can give you my opinion on it, but it's about the equivalent of someone sitting at a bar.
Well, it's just
and it's nice to be able to put it like that.
Yeah, and people will respect you more for it, because we all recognize that, we know some things and we don't know other things.
Yeah,
it's just great.
I wouldn't say we all recognize that. Sometimes we don't.
Yeah, well, true.
But I love what you're alluding to there in a way is the potential to kind of lose one's authenticity. So kind of while being contextually relevant and recognizing the needs of the context and your clients, to not let that diminish your presence and what you actually bring. I don't know, that's kind of the theme I'm extracting from what you're saying. But it's great that it was helpful. That's great. And anyone else want to talk about what they're taking away? People that are already doing a bunch of corporate work. I know, Jill, you've got some new clients. I'm glad you just raised your hand. You work in a very hardcore financial sector environment with investment bankers.
Yeah.
What are you taking?
I do. I love, Mario, I love your model, your awareness to action model. I use it a lot in corporate. And it's seemingly simple, but it's actually almost like a 3-point step, because you can be aware of stuff, but not be willing to change anything. or you can be aware of stuff, but not really acknowledge or authenticate it completely. So it's kind of like a stage to lead clients through, this is kind of, and get their commitment at each point. And I particularly liked, I love the inclusive language, because I don't think of myself as an academic, and big words like cloud my brain. So I really just want to be able to try something on for myself and make it work. So the language is wonderful. And I think also, I love what you said about the Enneagram. Some people don't like it and don't want to work with it. And I think we should be open to that and respect that. For me, as a kind of coach, a new student to the Enneagram, it's almost a knowable system. Like you can study it as a coach and know it, but humans are not so knowable. Humans are mysterious and they are complex, and also the transition that you helped us understand, that it's for the client to decide if the jacket's fitting, if the sleeves are too long, or if it fits just right. So they need to be the final judge on whether or not the report makes sense or lands or whatever. So I love that part as well. And then what else? Yes, and the last thing, and this is something that I want to take out of this meeting, and it's for me really to think about some more, but the kind of difference between, as a coach using the Enneagram, between truth telling and maintaining safety. I think that's a dance that happens all the time in my coaching practice. And obviously it's about establishing trust over time. And I'm also stepping into a mentoring role now for coaching students, which is a slightly different role, more a telling role really. And I struggle sometimes to know, when to be softer and let things ride and when to redirect. So yeah, I'm holding that because, at what point do you say the truth or withhold it? And maybe that's a challenge for all coaches. I'd appreciate comments or not, depending on our time. But thank you, Ingrid. That's all from me.
Thank you.
So I'll just quickly comment on that last part. I mean, my view is that, it's something you develop with experience, right? Knowing, I remember one time having a client, he was a very senior executive, and he said, look, I've worked with other executive coaches before, and they would just keep asking me how I feel about things. And he said, sometimes I just want somebody to tell me what to do, right? And so you kind of have to develop an understanding of, okay, when is this learning self-directed? When do we empower the client to come to a conclusion on their own? And when do we say, I've had other clients who had a similar sort of situation, and here's something they tried. You might want to try this.
Yeah.
Okay? Might not work, but I've seen it work, and why don't we give it a try? Right. And that's something you develop over time, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mario.
That's great. Thank you. That's great and so succinct. Cool. Who haven't we heard from in
See a raised hand from
there, Susan. Thank you. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now lower my hand. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much on so many levels. I agree, ditto with what others have said with your language, Mario, and the spaciousness and the lightness of the words. And that's been one of my struggles, is how to take this technical and complex subject and materials and simplify it so it's not just stopping people in the tracks and it's not overwhelming, and it gives some ease. I'm finding people, I love the words, want the ease. So that was one of my takeaways, and your reminders of the spaciousness of this work, giving space to people. We are so constricted as it is now because of the traumas and everything else that's coming up that we then I can't think clearly as I get constricted in my body and my heart and other places. So for you giving that reminder and that spaciousness of not trying to know it, to identify it for people when they do come to us and say, what's my type? And they get into all of that, so that we can create, like, maybe perhaps the ripple effect of putting spaciousness in this world so that people can grow and be allowed to grow and not be nailed down. I'm continuously learning about myself. So I have a program this Saturday on the Enneagram, and it's on resets. And part of what I'm wanting to do, and this was very helpful for it too, along with some of the other programs I've heard, is that cellular spaciousness and resets to all of this work. So it's continuously, how do I simplify it in language? I've worked a lot with leaders, I've worked with individuals. This is a group setting. So the desire to work with this more in business has been something I've been going to. So anyhow, I sent you an email to get on your list. Thank you. And I love the questions, and I learned from you all. So thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much, everybody. It would be wonderful if we could have questions and more, and ask every single person what they're taking away. I want to really respect your time, Mario, and your immense generosity in showing up and sharing your work and teaching us. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And I know everyone here is as well. So yes, as they say.
Well, it's my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me, Ingrid. Just for all of you, I got the chance to spend some time with Ingrid in Cairo, like I said last month, and developed a deep appreciation for her and her intellect, and just being a sweet person. So I knew her through social media. I mean that, Ingrid. I knew her through social media, but of course you don't really know someone. So I was thrilled to be here when you invited me. So thank you.
Thank you so much,
right.
Everyone. Thank you. Go well, and let's hope that a bunch of us are going to be there in September in the professional training.
Great to see you all. Thank you again. Pleasure.
Thanks, stay well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Well, see you.